Hi, good morning. This is Lisa Simmons from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. I am the program manager for festivals and local cultural councils, and I am here with my colleague, Charles Baldwin.
I'm Charles, and I am the program officer for the Up Inclusive Design Initiative, and I'm very excited to be talking about festivals and public events today.
We're really excited to be sharing this webinar. It's a really important webinar for festivals and public events, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. This is the first time we're doing Facebook Live.
This is the first time we're doing Facebook Live, and caveat, we know that Facebook Live itself is not accessible. It's not like YouTube that has an audio component that will turn it into text. So the Mass Cultural Council, like everyone else, this is part of a journey towards accessibility and towards inclusion. We're not ever done. So that's my caveat for Facebook Live. Mark Zuckerberg.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to start. And Charles is going to, as the UP expert and the accessibility expert, is going to be going through the presentation. And then we'll just be talking. If you have any questions, as I said before, if you can just type them into the box, because we've muted the conference because there's a lot of people on it. So if you have a question, we could address them at the end of the session.
And Lisa and I, not only are we colleagues here at the Mass Cultural Council, but we've known each other for quite a few years. So I think it's going to be really about a dialogue and a conversation.
Right.
Some things that I might bring up around access and inclusion you might question, and I think that's good.
Right.
Because it is sometimes a tug and pull, trying to figure out the best methods going forward.
Excellent. Okay. Charles.
Well, this first slide is the mission of the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which is really to be promoting excellence, access, education, diversity in the arts, humanities, and sciences, seeking to improve the lives of the citizens of the Commonwealth.
Right.
I like this second slide. It shows a picture of an astronaut in outer space.
I was going to ask you, an astronaut in outer space. But,
well,
okay.
Because in outer space, we're all disabled. So the idea is that it's not the person's disability, but yet the environment that is disabling.
Right.
And that's why I use that image of the astronaut, because again, in that environment, we're all disabled. And it's really trying to come to the idea that the initiative looks at, which is that universal design practices that anticipate and intentionally accommodate, it's all about the planning. And that is, of course, one of the most affordable ways to create access is to spend time planning rather than spend money reacting.
Right. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about this, how, you know, I run a festival that's happened before too, sort of being reactionary and to plan. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I do like the whole piece where you say it's not the person who's disabled, but rather the environment that's disabling. I think that's a really important point just to sort of hit on.
And it's a shift in perspective because it moves away from putting the pressure on our very human regularity and rather touches upon the idea that with intent, these environments that we move through, whether they're digital or physical or attitude or communication environments, that with intent we can accommodate. And that's what it's really all about.
Right. I think that's what's very important. Okay.
So we'll just address a little bit the ADA. ADA, of course, I think is a civil rights regulation.
Yes,
it often gets wrapped up into architectural access, which is great for developers and builders. But so often when people think about the ADA, it hits that point of like, oh, just tell me what to do. And we're thinking about bathrooms and we're thinking about ramps, which are always important things, but the universal design goes beyond that and looks at the much bigger picture. But I think there are two things to think about when we think about the ADA. One is integrated settings. The goal is that the environments that we're creating are as accessible to as many people as possible.
Right.
I think that's a big one. Also, within the ADA is the phrase effective communication. It's broad enough to mean a lot of different things, but I think it has import because it has to do, again, with messaging and how you get that across. how is it effective? I think for the regulation it talks about sound amplification. But for me, it's the bigger, broader picture of communication.
And I think it goes back to what we were talking about, the planning. And that's all part of that whole communication, and that if you can communicate accurately and well enough, pre-festival, pre-event planning, people will know where to go if they need accessibility, such as a wheelchair ramp or something like that. They'll know where to go if they have issues with loud sounds, but they still want to be part of the festival and part of that public event. They'll know all these things ahead of time so that they're not showing up to a space or a place that
And it's so beneficial to the festival organizers, again, to plan and anticipate, because that way everyone's ready, and it removes the whole idea of the reaction. They're like, oh, surprise, who's at the door? But rather anticipating the rich human variety of the Commonwealth and everyone who comes through town, and with some authentic messaging and some really candid perspective on what you're already doing, you can highlight some accessibility features without having to spend money. That being said, there's always money to be spent.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and we're going to get a little bit more into undue burden and things like that. But
that's a tough one. But
yes, exactly.
So why are we doing this?
Well, because we want festivals and public events to be accessible to everybody, or as accessible as they can be to everybody. So why are we doing this webinar? Why are we talking about this?
And thinking about making a festival accessible, I think it really is, it's important with the idea, it's that democratic perspective of everyone should be included. And it's an opportunity for us to diversify audiences. It's also an opportunity to, this falls into some of the legal stuff, but it's a risk management thing, which is insurance, and you want to make sure that people are safe, because within ADA and access and inclusion, you do also want to make sure that you're safe and in a good place for, again, rich variety of people.
Right, and that's what and you do say that. It is the law. The ADA requires
it. Law.
There are ways that you can get around it, but you don't want to do that. So we're here to talk about how you can make your festival, your public event, the most accessible as it can be.
Right.
And it's always interesting, because when I think about accessibility, you start thinking about wheelchairs and things like that, but it's also people on crutches, people who have canes, people, so I want us to always be thinking broadly about what accessibility and inclusion means, because, people oftentimes think, well, we need to throw a ramp there, or we're sorry that these are stairs and you can use the elevator, we're cool. But as we're talking about this, we'll talk a lot about the different kinds of accommodations that sometimes people need to make.
Right. That logo, that graphic, that international symbol of accessibility, which is the figure in the wheelchair, does make us mostly think about physical access and mobility devices, but we know it's more broad than that. There's communication access as well as social access.
Right.
The invisible disabilities that are neuroatypicalness or cognitive, we'll chat about that. So getting started. It's a brief outline because it is worth noting some of the ADA regulations. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
Coordinating staff and volunteers, that's also part of the planning process, because obviously if your leadership is involved and you can get the message out to all your staff and volunteers, you want everyone to have the same information, to be consistent with that information.
Exactly, that everybody's on the same page and everyone understands. Right.
I also address programming and the idea of who takes stage, which ties into both marketing and website information. It is worth, this is for festivals, some are outdoors, some are indoors, some are one-off events, some are multiple days.
Some are in fields, some are in
fields. So we will talk briefly about sites and venues. Responding to requests, again, anticipation will make responding to requests a lot more easy. And then, of course, risk management and medical considerations.
I think that that's really important, the whole responding to requests, because oftentimes if people don't have the right answer, they don't necessarily know what the response should be, so that they don't respond. And that's not okay. That's not the way to handle when we're talking about accessibility.
It's very true. I mean, it ties into customer service.
Right.
That whole idea of like, you could have a marvelous time, but if you have a surly waiter, then that meal is ruined. So.
Right.
Okay. So with ADA regulations and priorities, I think a couple of things which I hinted at the very start that are really important to remember. Integrated settings is one of the goals of the ADA.
Can you say, what is that?
What that means is that it's not a special program for a special population.
Okay.
So that's the idea is that
inclusive.
Whatever the program is that everyone is involved. So it's an inclusive program. We talked a little bit about effective communication, which I think, again, sometimes has to do with sound amplification so that people can hear. It could be having large format playbills for people who don't see as well. But it really, for me, a lot of it has to do with how are you communicating the message.
Right.
Because effective could also be, do you have texts? Do you phone calls? Is it emails?
Right.
Just the platforming.
Right. And even when you get to that festival and you get to that public event, how are you communicating where things are for people who may need them?
Signage.
Signage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Wayfinding, I think, falls under effective communication.
Which goes back to the whole thing around planning.
Right.
You need to be planning these things so that you have this information.
I've also included reasonable accommodations. I like this, and it ties to the final note there, which is undue burden.
Right.
Is this idea of, what is reasonable?
Right.
What becomes a burden? And the story that I always like to tell, which I think reflects on don't hide behind undue burden, is the nurse, a woman who was deaf, became a nurse, hospital hired her, and they suddenly realized, oh, this deaf nurse, we're going to need an interpreter with her wherever she goes. That is an undue burden. So she sued, and she won.
Really?
So it was not considered an undue burden for this nurse, with her skills, with a job at the hospital, to have an interpreter with her.
Did the hospital provide that?
That the hospital had to provide that. Now, the hospital wisely, this has kind of a happy ending, wisely they decided to become and really focus on, hey, we've got this nurse who speaks this language.
Right, 2 languages.
So then it became,
think about it that way.
Right, so then it became a center for deaf health.
Oh.
So that was great. But you can't hide behind undue burden. And what is reasonable, the bar keeps being raised. So obviously in the context of what you can do with your festival, what I might be able to do with my festival, that varies, but you have to give it your all.
But the thing is, so we're talking about undue burden, and in that case, it's very interesting that the nurse ended up winning. So a lot of people might be afraid to sort of even, open the floodgates because of what might happen and the cost that comes with providing an accessible environment. So so we know there's reasonable accommodations and undue burden, and it's sort of a gray area. So how is it that festivals...
think one of the best ways to show that you have tried everything is what we're talking about in this festival. I have an access plan.
Okay.
I have access features. I've got this focus. So you've got this whole energy behind what this movement is. And there will be times that based on, again, fiscal constraints, size of your organization, the capacity, that you might not be able to achieve what you want. But the way to show that you've tried is all these steps that we're talking about.
Right, is that you've actually put together a plan, and you've done that.
So we know the most affordable and most effective way to create a sense of belonging for a rich variety of people is the coordination of staff and volunteers and staff training.
Right.
Because, as we said, it's that idea. If you have a difficult time, but a human contact, a friendly person, a helpful person, makes a huge difference.
And a knowledgeable person, someone who knows, you need to go over this way, or this is where you can go hear this band where it's not so loud and it's not going to affect you. Right. So,
or in fact, based on I've got 3 or 4 people at the table, why don't I take you over there? It's kind of crowded. We'll work our way through the crowd. So sometimes that extra step makes a huge difference.
Right.
So it's really about a top-to-bottom buy-in. You want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So it's not just the volunteers, but it's your executive directors, it's the marketing person, it's everybody, because that way you've got a full commitment. you do want to, I always think one of the best things for volunteers is to recruit from the people you're trying to reach.
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because that way you're already starting to build this sense of belonging. As I always like to say when talking about access and inclusion is that the goal is to be equitable, not to bestow equity.
Equity, yes. No, that's
So
true.
one of the ways to do it is to actually walk the walk.
And you're building your audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Because people are going to tell people this festival or this public event is accessible, and I'm working at it, and I'm being a part of it, and I'm really supportive of it. So
Yes. So that's why the idea of who takes stage, it reflects on the same idea of recruiting volunteers from the folks that you're trying to reach. Same thing. If you are trying to broaden your diversity, who's on the stage? Who's the entertainment? Who's hanging the artwork? Who's doing the music? And then it's often, who are your neighbors? Really including people and programming in that line. So I think that's a huge way to create, again, authentic engagement, is because not only are you inviting people, but you are reflecting that.
Right.
Whether it's on the stage or in the show or whatever the presentation might be.
And I do think, and it's important, as you were saying, that it's top down, that someone's not bringing it up and saying, we really need to do this, you need to do this because, you're wrong and not, being accessible, but that the organization and the festival and the public event needs to say, this is one of our top priorities and this is how we're going to go with it.
And this is one of the top priorities of the Mass Cultural Council. And I think one of the things that's important to remember, we are sort of champions and cheerleaders. We are not the ADA police. So we want to nurture this and get this movement going.
Right.
But
and getting out the right information.
Yeah.
So that if you do have questions, or you can come here, you can go to Charles, obviously, and ask a question, and he can even come to a site visit. You've done a site visit for festivals before.
I enjoy going to festivals. It's true.
And doing festivals. Site visits.
Marketing and website. I think this is really important because, again, this is where we talk about digital access.
And communication.
And it gets really wrapped up, into the ramps and the restrooms, that kind of thing. But one of the easiest things is to look candidly at what you have, because you can highlight things that are already there. And you can certainly move forward to try to make things better, but sometimes it's just looking at what you have and highlighting that and letting people know what you offer. Strategic partnerships, that's the whole connection with who's on the stage and who's your volunteers.
Right, and who's your sponsors.
If you're making true partnerships, then you're already gotten ambassadors to help you spread the word. Right. And that's a sense of trust. And
just to talk about that for a little bit more, and that strategic partnership is very much a part of who's in your festival as well. If you have a music festival, you have a film festival, you have any other kind of festival, you have performers, maybe you have deaf performing or performers, or wheelchair accessible or wheelchair. I had a great film about people doing dance in wheelchairs. So who's your partner then? So who are you looking to that can help support that film or help support that performance? Because they're going to be very interested in that you're doing that kind of thing through your festival, your public event, and that's a very great connection for you to make. So to be thinking about that constantly, about how you can connect and broaden your space.
We know that the lens of ability crosses over all the other isms. So if you're doing the Portuguese festival in Provincetown and you're working on access, there are ways, as you said, to include in some of the programming a broad perspective and certainly a physical diversity for that integration that you might be hoping to achieve.
Right. And people as well. When we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about different groups of people that you want to be participatory in your festival or your public event. Participating.
Yeah, that works. But I think it's so tied because, again, we're looking through the lens of ability.
Right.
But all of this that we're talking about around access and inclusion, again, crosses all those borders.
Right.
You know.
Exactly.
The site and venue.
It's always the site and venue. This is what it always comes down to, but this is what people always think about when they think about accessibility, is basically the site and the venue. I'm done, I'm good, I've got the site and venue. I mean, we know it is the top one. It's like the most important thing for us to be thinking about. So,
yeah, I didn't put it on the top, but it is
I know.
a doozy.
It is.
Because, one, so often if you're in a venue, it's not your venue.
Right.
You know, you're renting it or it's been donated. If it's outside or on the streets, you've got to deal with that. And so it's really looking at it with a keen eye. For institutions that are going into venues that aren't your own, part of it is sort of the creating of a checklist so that you're aware of, oh, okay, if someone uses a mobility device, the restroom is over here, or both restrooms are upstairs, so that's not going to make that very easy. So really looking with a keen eye at venues around both the physical, digital, and attitudinal domains. And when it's outdoors, it's really thinking candidly about the environment and making sure that information is there. So it's not so much that, you know, oh, the access tent is down there, but rather, and I put it up here at the top, think about the landscape,
yes,
the slope, the terrain, surfaces, you know, nothing like the charming Boston Common, which is a lovely place to hold a festival, but for if you've walked those paths, there's a few roots and bricks, and some of them, you know.
Right.
So, but thinking candidly about that, because if you can put that information out in a clear, simple manner, it's 0.6 miles over a rocky terrain or over a brick surface, so that people then can make the choice about what they might want to do. But it shows that you've intentionally given it that keen perspective and you're aware of it.
And that's what I was going to say. Once again, back to the planning and the communication. At least when someone goes to your website and sees, oh, they've made this effort and they're giving this information and they're telling me that, you know, here's where, you know, all the information I need if I have, you know, mobility issues or whatever kind of issues. It just shows that you want people at your festival or at your public event. It makes it open and it makes it much more inclusive.
By providing that information and communicating all of this, it also doesn't put the onus on the individual to have to divulge, oh, I'm this, or this, can you please help me? But rather, I as the institution have said, oh, well, we've got this and this is what we're going to create. So then the variety of people who come to, whether it's your website or your press release or your blog, realize that you have thoughtfully been aware of the environment.
Right, and that's one of the most important things. So it's not a second thought, and you don't feel like you're different than everyone else. You're getting information, and by the time you get there, you already know everything, so you're not, like, looking around. So that's something that festivals and public events can do to help make people feel comfortable coming to their space.
And so much of it, again, it's that planning.
Right.
And responding to requests. If you've been doing your due diligence to plan and be aware and be thoughtful and anticipate that if you should have a request, A, you'll have an answer.
Yes.
If that request should become a grievance, you'd be like, hey, this is all
done,
the work that we're doing.
Right.
And it's true. I mean, my goal is that not only do I hope the festivals and the listeners start thinking about, you know, what are the ways that we can create access, but to keep improving upon that each year.
Right.
So some of the responding to requests is listening to people to understand what they might be looking for and what they might want.
Right, and making note of that so that you can make whatever changes you need to make. And this also comes down to the idea of having your volunteers, who oftentimes are your frontline people at festivals and public events, to understand what it means to respond to these requests and understand how to deal with these requests. So it goes back to training and back to planning.
Right.
But for oftentimes when you do have festivals and public events, those are the people that are going to be doing a bulk of the work and meeting the public.
Frontline staff is the way to go, because you want to make sure that they're informed and they have all the correct info. Everyone has it. But you also want to empower them to be able to make decisions on the spot, because you know so the festival's happening and it's busy and it's crazy, and someone comes up to ask the volunteer, which I always suggest wearing something that identifies you as a volunteer, that you've come to request, so you want to give them the power to handle it and not to have to run to somebody else. Now, obviously, again, that's context, but the more training that you can do, and I also get that sometimes you can't, there may not be the wherewithal to do a big, deep training.
Right.
So then again, it's back to that checklist, and sometimes making sure that people, again, have that same information.
And have the right information.
Yeah. So what do we got? Risk management. Well, risk management is always great for the executive directors when thinking about access, but it is true to be aware, and this sort of ties into that flexibility. If you've got, let's say, you're stamping people on the way in to an outdoor festival, and you've got an older person, or someone who uses a mobility device, sometimes it might be helpful to let them cut the line, which, you know, again, may not be policy. You know, everyone's supposed to queue up.
If it's a hot day.
It's a hot day. You know, so
seats,
can you make those decisions based on what's happening right in front of you? So that, to me, becomes sort of like a risk management, as well as, you know, I'm diabetic and I've got to make sure that I have food with me, and it might be a food-free environment, or
you can't take stuff in with you. You can't take water in with you.
I need medication refrigerated, but
again, there's that list of having for the volunteers to say these particular, you know, people. If you have these questions, this is okay. We're going to allow this.
Right, it's informing people.
So you don't get, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, well, that's what I always tie into with customer service. What I used to always tell my staff is that it's like an improv, because no one wants to hear the word no.
Of course not.
They just want to hear the word yes. Now, yes
and
could be followed with...
festivals are happy. You want to hear yes.
Just say yes. So staff training.
Yes.
So accessibility. So these are just sort of some things to be thinking about concretely when thinking about access. It's great to have the information about the services that you have out there. So if you're thinking about people with vision impairments or who are blind or low vision, think about offering audio description, which is, again, a descriptive language about what's happening.
Right.
Now, a lot of folks might do this with their friends. So if you and I went to a show together and something amazing was happening on stage, I might describe it to you. So, but you can also systemize that and make it part of the process.
Right. Especially if you're having a festival or public event where if something wasn't audio described, you'd be missing a lot. You know what I mean? So and this is where we come down to reasonable access, or undue burden, or whatever.
Well, reasonable accommodations about what's necessary.
About what's necessary and understanding what's necessary for your particular festival. Because some you might actually, for like a film festival or a theater festival or something like that, they're, when you're thinking about how you want to include people that otherwise wouldn't be able to hear or see, or so. Then you sort of have to make the decision about what it is you need for that particular.
Well, and a lot of times, this is, based listening to customers, but a lot of time it's not defining who might need the service, but recognizing what services you might be able to provide. And again, that goes back to, we're not talking about the person, but rather the environments that are disabling. So if we can offer an audio description which enhances the visual experience, that could be for a person who's blind, but it could also be for someone with cognitive disabilities. So if you're thinking about mobility, again, that's where we talk about ramps, but that's when you also, beyond ramps, you want to think about drop-off points, entrance points, slope. Again, going back to the Common, there's a couple of good-sized hills in the Common, and if you are working with a mobility device that you are powering yourself, that could be a little bit of a trip, and you might want to have someone behind you giving a little hand. But it's also signage, because we know that the festival's packed.
Right.
It's an outdoor event. I'm using a mobility device. It could be a wheelchair. It could be a walker. It could be a Segway.
Right.
It could be any of those things. But this is where signage will be such a big deal, because it's like, oh, I know either it's a map or signage, some kind of consistency, so that I can either see the volunteer, the sign, look at my map, that's where the accessible restroom is, that kind of thing.
Right. So, especially with festivals too that are in different places and spaces. So there might be a festival that's over the course of 3 days, and in one space it's on a outside on a lawn or something, and then the next time it's inside and at a building with an art show or something like that, but you're constantly having to move around. So where can you move around, and how do you move around those spaces? instead
think,
of just one
right,
big venue.
routes.
Right.
So routes are really important. And the other thing I want to point out, which I think ties in, you could do all your great work, but if all your vendors come in and they have counters that are at 40 inches, then someone who is of short stature or uses a device that creates, lower perspective, you can't reach it.
Or if you have a festival that's outdoors, that it's like an arts festival that has the little cabanas or whatever, and those cabanas are up off of the grass, a little bit high. People can't get into looking at the artwork or looking at. So that's something to think about too. Like, those little huts. Are they to the ground? Are they exactly?
Well, and can you bring things out?
Yes.
And again, this is that variety of people who are short.
Right.
They could be kids. They're so little.
They could be me, I'm sure.
Well, me too. So. Let's see. So, let's go back to the other screen, because there was mobility, vision, and then there was two other things. Because I wanted to talk about audio, communication. So if you've got folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, so you've certainly got a population in Massachusetts of folks who are deaf who might want to participate. You could have ASL interpreters, there's captioning, but I also like to focus on, because I'm of that population, the aging population that doesn't hear us well.
Right.
What? Yeah. So that's something to be aware of.
Yes.
And
people don't like to talk about it. Like they want to bring that out. They don't want you to know that they're hard of hearing. So this is another thing where it comes down to having things available and have people understand.
Right.
People don't want to be like, but wait, people don't like to bring out their.
This is it. This is, again, rather than putting the onus on the individual,
put it on
to say, well, you didn't tell me you wanted a sound enhancement, but rather if you say we're offering sound enhancements,
and then it's like,
ways to amplify the sound, that might be something I would take advantage of.
Right.
Or I was at a show last night, which maybe the enunciation of the performer wasn't so great. They had captions. So that way it was open captions. Anyone could see it. It was great for me to get some of the lyrics. It's great for English second language learners.
Right.
It's great for a number of people. So captioning is really something to look at. And sometimes, and this is where we get into how to do it inexpensively, sometimes if you know that there's some songs that are going to be done, you could hand out lyric sheets. Right. So now we're talking about a piece of paper.
Right. Or in the program, it could
or
be
in the playbill,
sort of follow along.
So there's all sorts of ways to do it. And then last is to be aware of folks with sensory disabilities, cognitive difference, neuroatypicalness.
And these are things you don't see. These are not visible, right?
And so if you get wrapped up into, you don't look like a person, then again, you're missing the point of creating environments that are supportive and anticipating, as opposed to putting the onus on the person. So you don't have to self-identify. You don't have to think that's what someone looks like. And it ties in, again, to staff training and awareness.
Right. And having a plan.
Yeah. So we decided to end with, who are we talking about anyway? Because we have certainly been addressing the spectrum of abilities. Yes. As I would like to say, the spectrum of abilities from toddler to elder, because we all will experience them. I think that's important. We've got physical and visual disabilities, folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, and certainly capital D deaf is less a disability and more a communication difference.
Right.
So that if you start thinking about creating programming that includes ASL, well, now you're starting to talk about multilingual programming. And what are the other big languages spoken in Massachusetts?
Is ASL.
ASL. Are you doing any programming in Spanish?
Right.
Are you doing any programming?
Well, that's when we sort of make that shift from accessibility to inclusion. And what do you do? Right. Exactly. And that they should go hand in hand.
I think so.
Yeah. I think so too. Right.
Yeah. It's the perspective that everyone rises with the tide.
And it's interesting. You list here trauma. I mean, I think that's one of the probably largest growing populations.
Yeah, the statistics are vast, and that includes, you mentioned someone on crutches.
Right.
So get away from the idea of disability as an identity, which sometimes it is, but what we're talking about is ability, and that variable that could occur based on a broken leg, a surgery, an illness. I mentioned diabetes earlier, so that has its own, you got to, are you using insulin? Are you, do you have, the candy bar in your pocket, whatever that might be.
Right, exactly.
So that we really want to be aware of a variety of things, and trauma is one of them. Age is the other.
Age, yes. Yes, absolutely true. So we're going to talk a little bit about those statistics.
A little bit. I think that what is interesting when we really, and some of this is from the World Health Organization, but when you think about the range of ability,
right,
1 in 5. How many people in this room?
Right.
There's 7 people in this room.
Yeah, so 1 in 5.
Well, it's probably us because we're the older ones in the room. But I think that's important to remember so that when you're thinking about why am I doing this? Well, if 20% of the population feels that they have some functional limitation, then why aren't we anticipating to accommodate?
Right, right.
So I think
especially
that's
in events like festivals and public events where you have a wide range of people that come to those events, and they're oftentimes free, and they're oftentimes, people sort of happen upon them maybe. So you want to be prepared. You want to be able. You're not necessarily sending out an invitation list and saying, "Come to my festival." You're opening it up to everybody, and in doing so, you want to make sure that everybody can come.
Well, and I think of, and I brought up the Portuguese festival in Provincetown just because that's where my family often goes, but it's that idea of if you've got traditional festivals that are connecting to cultures, then those are often, the leaders are often our seniors, the people who are remembering the traditional dances, the traditional dress, the traditional food. So we would want them to be able to participate as well, even if they don't move around, see as well, or hear as well. So I think that's really important. The other percentage to look at this is that in youth, the percentage of brain-based disabilities is really increasing.
Wow.
And this is where you get into sensory-sensitive autism, Asperger's. And think about mental health and behavioral things. That's also something to be aware of. So, again, it's all tied to the idea that really disability is us. And as I like to say, and I heard this from my friend Yoel Cassell, instead of saying disability, I like to say this ability. Yes. Because again, that sort of touches upon the spectrum of ability. And then how can you anticipate that?
And I think these statistics are interesting because a lot of times when you are creating a public event or a festival, you have in your idea what the demographic is that you think that are coming to your festival. And so if you do know that, then you look at these statistics and you think, oh my gosh, so I think that most of the people that are coming to my festival are between 21 and 64, and 17% of those people have disabilities. So this helps you sort of think about, and 50% of adults 65 and older have disabilities. So if you're creating this festival and it's an art fair, or if you're anticipating that this is the demographic of your festival, then these are really important statistics to learn and to know as you do your planning for your event or your festival.
Well, and the other number, of course, is that baby boomer number. 10,000 people in America are turning 65 every day.
Every day.
Every day. That's a lot.
I think they're all moving to downtown Boston.
We're not there yet.
Wait, what's this one in the last 10 minutes?
Oh, the last one is that almost 500 Americans in every 10 minutes have an injury that results in a disability.
Wow.
Could be falling down the stairs, tripping over something, tripping over a pet in the house, falling off a curb. I mean, it could be all sorts of things.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. This is where, again, some of those numbers come from the World Health Organization. But it all ties to the idea that disability, or as I like to say, human functional limitation, is a very regular thing. It's not separate. It's not that population of folks over there. It's us.
And this is where we come to this when we're talking about stereotypes. Because old school tradition was, accessibility was, all we needed to think about were people in wheelchairs, and they were visible and we could see them, and that's who we thought okay, let's accommodate for that, and we're good, and we've accommodated for that.
Well, and even it's sort of like the diss on ability is that the perspective could be that you're broken, less than,
Right.
All those things that folks on the margins are always being accused of. And we know that it's not true, so you don't want to make stereotypes because why?
Right.
They
Because at
don't.
any given moment it could be
Well, and you'll be turned on its head
right.
in a second.
Right.
Because, again, it's all ages, it's all colors, it's all sexes, have families, have jobs, have goals. These are all things that most of us every day want from our lives.
And I think that's important to think about that when you're working with your staff and your volunteers and you're doing your plan and you're, putting together your maps or whatever, that to have people think about people in their family who may be coming to that festival or may be part of that public event, and to making sure that they would feel included. Because like you said, everyone has a family member, everyone has somebody who has some sort of disability in some way, shape, or form. We've seen the statistics. So to really just be thinking about that, so that when you come across that and you're the frontline person, that you're making everyone who comes through that gate as comfortable as they can.
Right. You want to make everyone feel welcome, because whether it is somebody that you know who has a disability, but people don't always identify by that.
No.
So, I'm wearing glasses, but I don't identify as someone with a visual impairment.
Right.
But if I take them off, I probably won't be able to see anyone else in the room.
And if I took mine off, I wouldn't be able to see you.
Exactly.
So it's
That's
true,
what
but
I'm
you
saying.
wouldn't think about that as a physical impairment, but it totally is.
But it totally
if I
is.
lost
Yeah.
my glasses for some reason, there was like something that went on and they fell off my face, I wouldn't be able
Right.
to.
I'm
I would not be
cooking.
able to navigate.
I can't find my glasses. I can't see the ingredients.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's a little messy.
Yeah.
And then I put this picture up just of a number of people who are successful, talented, creative people, again, breaking the stereotypes about how we perceive people of
Exactly.
varying abilities.
Exactly.
And they all have one thing or another. I can't remember what they are, but
Oh, I was going to ask you.
I know. I think
really, you're going
I
to put
think
up a
it's a
slide like this, and
tab.
I don't know what Will Smith's
Yeah, I was
disability
going
is.
to say, this gave us...
Will Smith's disability, I think he has dyslexia.
Oh, right, exactly, which people don't think of
Well,
as a
right,
disability,
so-
but when you're reading a program or doing a map and you have severe dyslexia, that's going to drop off the page, that's
It's
going to
not
get
something
flipped
that's
around,
visible.
it's not something that's
It's
visible.
not something that you think about.
Right, and so somebody might be nervous and anxious about that, so they're going to act a certain way because they're not going to identify that that's their issue. And so you have to be, and that comes down to volunteers, and it comes down to staff, and it comes down to customer service. Because like we've said, festivals and public events bring people from all over, and if it's an open, non-invitational thing, you're going to run the gamut of the people that you're going to
Right, so
meet.
if Will Smith shows up and he's like, what's on the agenda today? And
Right.
you hand him a piece of paper and he looks at it and says, could you just tell me? Then you should be ready to tell him.
Right, and not be like, oh, you can't tell, like, what, you can't read that?
Can you just
No?
read that
What?
next?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. No, right, so exactly, and that is about training.
Right,
And about
and an
and about
opportunity
the
to talk to Will Smith, which
Yeah.
would be pretty great.
Yeah, exactly.
Bunch of resources to be thinking about. Mass Cultural Council itself is a resource, with Lisa, Mass Festivals, myself with the Inclusive Design Initiative, but we have a lot of different things out there.
Right.
So that this sometimes is how to think about strategic partnerships, but also to gain knowledge and information. Boston is home to the New England ADA Center, which is covering all the states of New England, but it is here in Boston. Cultural Access New England exists. There's, again, a lot of programs out there, each with their own sort of hook and totally worth checking out, either for information, for partnerships, moving forward.
So we've come to the end of our
Yes, we have.
our webinar, and I know that it's a lot of information, right? And it's a lot of sort of like where do we begin? Is there like a step that I can take to get, so that I know that I'm doing the most that I can do, to having to pay for interpretive You know,
I
people
think,
who
right.
do interpretive
I think
stuff,
that the first step is to take the first step.
Okay.
Sometimes, again, it's so big, I can't
It
even
is,
decide.
and it
so
seems
that
overwhelming.
you don't do anything. So the first step is to make that first step. And I think one of the ways to make that is look at who's in your organization,
Okay.
who's already participating. Because if you can talk candidly to your group, and there's someone who would say, well, you know what, I don't get around so well, let's talk about what it means from my perspective to move through this event. So that you immediately start with your colleagues and your immediate circle.
Right.
And you can grow that based on patrons and people who have been coming. So make that first step in planning and talking to people with disabilities who, again, may not identify, may not be visible, but that's why just start with your inner circle.
Right. And should you sort of do an inventory of the venues that you are planning to have your festival in?
There is
to make sure that you...
The ADA Center gives you an accessibility checklist.
Oh, great.
Which
okay.
is far bigger than most will want to deal with. But it's a great way to get started. If you're thinking about, what venue shall I use, that checklist is a great way to start looking at, entrances and routes and weather and shade and restrooms and levels and food service and water, whatever that might be. So ADA checklist for sites and venues.
On this. Is this on this?
Yes, the second dot there.
Okay,
and they're located in Boston near North Station.
Okay.
So totally worth checking out. And that is, again, checklist is a great place to start. And then, as I said, talking to your inner circle. Because if it was this group in the room, for me, as we talked about, would be the glasses.
Right.
Turning some information into large format information is so easy.
Right.
And that would mean that you and I might be able to see it.
Right.
I'm not one to go marching up lots of stairs. So, again, by taking advantage of who's in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And just don't be afraid to make that first step small.
Right.
Because sometimes you have to do it incrementally to get it right.
And the development of that plan.
The plan.
Should be one of the most important things that you're doing, so that you can always refer back to that plan, your accessible plan.
The plan, and you want to have that, and you want to, like any plan, you want to build in the flexibility for it to adapt and change based on patron needs, and because if you can grow this program, and then you're going to really want to start budgeting for some things.
Right.
If you are having, a big fair in Watertown, well, Watertown is home to Perkins. So that's like a world-famous institution for people who are blind and visually impaired. So wouldn't it make sense to connect with your neighbors or talk to them about, hey, we're putting on this festival. Would you critique, review, examine some steps that we could take to make it more accessible? So it's really about that kind of identification.
I think we have a question.
Yes.
Hi. So we have some questions coming on our Facebook Live.
Facebook Live.
And we have questions here on our...
Yeah, so following up on what you said about the checklist, what's the best place to go find an accessibility checklist?
I would start out with the New England ADA Center.
And we have it right up here. On their contact information is up on the resource board.
It's newenglandada.org. They're in Boston, New England ADA Center. And the checklist might be much broader than you might need, again, depending on the context of your event. But it's a great way to get you start thinking in that manner.
Great. This is a specific question about the Mass Festivals program. Can festivals apply twice per year, or do they?
Yes, there's two grant cycles. There's the spring summer, which is over now, but the fall winter opens up on June 14th.
And a festival could apply.
Yes.
Both.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They can't apply more than once in one grant cycle, but they can apply 2 times a year.
Great. And the last one I have here is if a space is not ADA qualified yet, what's the first step that an organization should take to start working on that, and is there any funding for that?
Well, obviously we don't have a lot of information about a non-accessible space. If you are having a public event and the space, you get to choose the space, I certainly wouldn't choose that space. because that could set you up for some problems.
Right.
If that, based on the context, this is the venue and you know it's not, again, physically accessible. So you want to be clear that it may not be physically accessible so that people who don't climb stairs are ready and know that. But you can then also think about, well, how would it be accessible? Could I make this upstairs event accessible digitally, say through Facebook Live or FaceTime?
Or setting up something downstairs.
Setting up
where
something
that
downstairs.
You can see it
Right,
exactly,
so you've got the TV monitor downstairs so you can see what's happening
I mean, the
upstairs.
best thing is to find then, if you know that you're attracting a number of people that aren't going to be able to make that climb or go to that event upstairs, then to be searching for another venue that you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to search for another venue, but
Yeah,
sometimes that isn't
sometimes
possible.
Right.
So how can you help the person see what's happening upstairs?
Right.
All this modern technology
will be able to do
is a way to really look at creating that access through a digital sphere.
Now, someone was asking, they're having trouble getting buy-in from their ED to hire an ASL interpreter for their festival, and she's wondering if there's any source that she can consult with to help make the case for providing the ACL. Is there any funding, is there any funding available for that?
There's not always specific funding available for ASL. My first thought would be if you're providing ASL interpreters, have you started talking with patrons who are deaf? Do you know people want to come? Because if you can show to an executive director that you've got capacity, you've got patrons dying to get in,
right,
but they need the service, well, that's one way to get an executive director
right,
on board.
When you think about money.
And the other thing is that I've heard before from institutions, I got the ASL interpreter, but nobody who was deaf came to the event.
Yes.
So all the more reason to reach out to either your patrons who are deaf or the school that has kids who are deaf or whoever that is. Reach out to them first because they may have some access to an interpreter that you're not aware of.
Right.
Is ASL interpreting the best bet based on who is following you? So it's a big question, and feel free, I've got my contact here, if you want to reach out to me to give me more details. That might be easier to take that question offline.
Exactly. But that's good. And then, we had talked about this, we've been talking about this throughout the course of the webinar about how do we send a message that the festival is going to be inclusive, and that is really all about communication and planning and making sure that you're connecting with partners and getting the word out and letting people know.
So, and a lot of that is if you highlighting what you're doing, including it in press releases so that it goes out to the general information, including it on your website clearly, so that's not hidden away somewhere. And if you are doing that, then you can also target some of your press or target your information based on, again, institutional and strategic partnerships.
Right.
So that way you're getting the word out. And you have to remember that building trust doesn't happen overnight.
Exactly.
And it does take time. And so that's why that whole idea of incremental to get it right. Start small and then build that trust.
And that trust comes from, as we've said before, your frontline people and your people that are going to be, the people giving out the information at the entry gate or throughout the festival. Do we have any examples of any festivals that are sort of doing this? Right. I know that you spent some time with Outside the Box Festival.
Outside the Box did a really great job last year, being really clear with sort of like know before you go information about routes and slopes and terrain, best drop-off points, that sort of thing. They had ASL interpreters for some of their production, of some of their performances. They had a large population of patrons who were deaf take advantage of that. They did some captioning. They created some viewing spots. So they were doing a lot. And I have to say, I'm not quite sure what's happening now that our dear friend Ted Cutler has passed.
I know. And I know oftentimes the film festivals are compliant and very focused on sort of the venues and providing.
Well, and film festivals fall into that idea of it's not my venue.
Right.
So how do you create that? So I always suggest, and I was working with Real Abilities over at the
Right.
Boston Jewish Film Festival, and Real Abilities is really working on this idea of like the reverse tech writer. So that when you're checking out venues and thinking about ways or different sites that
Right.
you will host these films, you've got a checklist that says, do you have sound amplification devices for enhancing the hearing or for audio describing? How would a patron who doesn't, do you have an elevator? Do you have a ramp?
Yep, exactly.
What are the different ways that because then based on what that venue has, you can take advantage of that and highlight that.
Exactly.
And I always say, so,
captioning,
like if you have a big film festival and maybe 5 of the movie, and it's a film festival, and often the distributor might do the description or the captions. So, and it's tough when you're independent, and I get that. But if you've got some films that offer these things, well, then create an access thread and say, hey, I've got 5 films that offer captioning.
Right.
Don't say who they're for, again, because it's about
just all you're
creating
doing
the
is saying that.
environment.
You're just putting that on your website, and you're just putting that information out there.
Right. Info, clear,
Excellent.
intuitive info.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions, I think we're
And we have questions
done.
can go offline.
Yes, you can
We
certainly connect with either one of us if you have any questions about your festival or your public event. We're more than happy to provide any information that we can.
And in regards to Facebook Live not having captions, of course YouTube does, and we have a wonderful resource in Boston, the National Center for Accessible Media. They have a new software out called Cadet, and they offer captions. So again, Mr. Zuckerberg, let's get this Facebook Live caption.
It's the next thing. It's the next phase. We
It's
all
next
know it. Everything goes in phases.
Stay nimble.
Right.
Stay nimble and bold and focused.
And plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And people listening in on the webinar, thank you very much.
And these slides are going to be available, so we will send around the recording once it's ready, so that you'll have it to share with your colleagues.
And again, if anyone wants to follow up, our contact info is on that last slide. Charles.Baldwin or Lisa.Simmons at art. What is it?
.state.ma.us. How long have you been here?
A little more than a year. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
done.
under an hour. So
Woo!
Perfect
was
timing.
it okay?
Perfect. Yeah, I was watching the clock.
So if it's live.